2 years later. Vikir sparred with Ahun, who was quickly overpowered. Ahun hit the ground, defeated, while the 17-year-old Vikir stood victorious. Ahun asked for another round, but Vikir told him training was over and walked away. Ahun's friends helped him up. He called Vikir an obnoxious brat, but admitted his strength was impressive. Another mentioned that even his archery now matched Ayen's. The third scoffed, saying Vikir wasn't that great. He'd made Ahun's nose bleed before too. Ahun rubbed his nose and said Vikir hadn't hit him. They stared at him, confused. Ahun explained that Vikir stopped before impact. The force from his strike alone had made him bleed. Vikir stood in the forest, catching his breath. The cliff before him was riddled with large holes, remnants of his training. He let out a quiet sigh of relief. He had finally mastered it. The 6th form was complete. He could now draw the 6th tooth perfectly. There was still a long way to go before reaching the 10th, but achieving this much at 17 was already remarkable. He unsheathed Beelzebub and counted 6 mana circles within him. He had become a high-class sword graduator. With the strength he'd built, he might even be able to defeat a swordmaster graduator. He turned toward the village, thinking about the 2 years that had passed since he became part of the tribe. Soon, it would be time to leave. Vikir went on a hunt with Ayen. He knelt beside a trail examining the ground. The tracks belonged to a Mushisu snake. When he glanced back, Ayen seemed lost in thought. He snapped at her, asking if she was daydreaming in the middle of a hunt. She jolted upright, claiming she was listening. Trying to shift the mood, she mentioned another hunting group had found something strange and wanted his opinion. She walked to Vikira's saddle, reaching into a pouch and pulling out a dagger. She said they'd found it on a trespasser in the forest and asked if he recognized the crest engraved on the blade. Vikir said he did. It belonged to the venomous house of Leviathan, one of the 7 houses of the Empire, alongside the iron blood swords of Baskerville. Ayen continued, saying they first thought the stranger might have been a survivor from the incident 2 years ago, but the group saw the person pour something into the river before leaving. When captured, they swallowed poison before they could be questioned. Her expression grew tense as she asked what had been on her mind. Did he want to return home? Vikir frowned and asked why she was suddenly asking that. Ayen looked down, saying she didn't want to hide anything from him. Someone else had been seen in the forest, a woman with red hair, searching for him. She'd been looking for 2 years. Then she asked again, did he want to go back? Vikir paused, then said he wasn't going back. Ayen's shoulders relaxed, the tension leaving her body. Her face brightened as she asked if he truly meant it. Vikir gave a small nod. She smiled and celebrated with Vikira. As she celebrated, Vikir thought they might still believe he was alive, but he couldn't return yet. Only once he could conceal his true power from Hugo would he make his return. The red-haired woman had to be Camille. Perhaps she felt indebted to him for saving her. If the Morgs could still enter the forest, then the alliance remained strong, he concluded. He decided to investigate further after hearing that the House of Leviathan had appeared in the area. Suddenly a massive fish burst out of the river and crashed onto the bank beside them. It gasped for air as Ayen noted that it signaled the coming of the rainy season. Judging by the size of the lungfish, it would be a long one. Vikir noticed something embedded in its side, metal, perhaps an arrowhead or a spear tip. He drew his sword and cut the creature open. Inside was a human skeleton clutching a spear, the weapon still impaling the fish from within. Ayen recognized the attire. It belonged to the Rococo tribe. She said it looked like the man had tried to fight his way out. Then her tone shifted. Lungfish only ate things that were already dead. Vikir stepped back from the carcass, scanning the forest around them. Something was happening here. He needed to find out what. As they moved deeper into the forest, Vikir and Ayen came upon a camp scattered with corpses, warriors from the Rococo tribe. Vikir examined the bodies closely. They hadn't died in battle. Their wounds were few, their skin pale and blotched. It was disease. Ayen called out to him, pointing ahead. She said there should be smoke rising from the Rococo village. It was mealtime, but there was none. They pressed on, reaching the village soon after. An eerie silence hung in the air, no movement, no sound. Vikir scanned the surroundings. No one had maintained the place for some time. Ayen peeked into a nearby hut and wondered aloud if they had relocated. As she lifted the tarp covering the entrance, a swarm of flies burst out. She recoiled, shouting for Vikir. Inside were dead bodies. Vikir looked down at another nearby and said he'd found one too. A closer inspection revealed red spots across the skin, the same as the warriors outside. The sight stirred an old memory. In his previous life, a plague with those same marks had swept through the forest. They had called it the Red Death, a disease that wiped out nearly all the native tribes of the woodlands. Ayen shouted that they needed to leave at once, calling the place cursed, but Vikir only replied calmly that it wasn't a curse, just an infectious disease. Her voice rose in panic, asking if that wasn't even worse, but he told her to relax. It didn't spread easily, and she could return to the tribe if she was that worried. His eyes drifted over the village as he spoke. There weren't enough bodies for an entire settlement. Many must have fled, trying to escape the plague. He said he would keep looking around, and that she could head back if she wished. Ayen hesitated, thinking him cold and unfeeling, when something rustled behind her. She turned and screamed. Vikir spun toward the sound as Ayen pointed, her voice shaking as she said it was a curse, a cursed child. Up ahead stood a small figure with hair falling over her face. Ayen tried to run but stumbled, her leg giving out in the panic. Vikir ignored her and approached the child, stopping a few paces away before crouching down. She couldn't have been older than 5, and she didn't look Rococo. Beside her was a small grave. He wondered if she had been mourning someone. He asked who she was, and the girl answered softly that she was Rococo, kitchen slave. When he asked for her name, she said it was Pomeranian. The name struck him as strange, imperial rather than tribal, and he wondered if she had been taken from outside the forest. Before he could speak again, she continued, "La Baskerville." Vikir froze, the words hitting him like a blade. He barely found the words to ask her again. The child pointed at her chest and said once more, quiet but clear, "Pomeranian, La Baskerville." 3 middle names existed within House Baskerville. Van was given to distant relatives, Lay to legitimate descendants, and La, the rarest, was reserved for direct female descendants in a family ruled by men. Vikir remained silent, still trying to process what he'd heard. How could someone with the La name end up here? Ayen's voice pulled him from his thoughts as she pointed to a pendant hanging around the girl's neck, asking if that was his family's emblem. Vikir crouched down again and told the girl he was going to take a look. He opened the pendant carefully. Inside was a small faded picture, an image of a man, a woman, and a teenage girl. His eyes widened. The man in the photo was unmistakable, a younger Hugo Baskerville. Confusion turned to agitation. Why was Hugo in this picture? What was this child's connection to him? The girl shrank back, frightened by the sudden change in his expression. Vikir glared at her, unable to hold back, demanding to know who the people were in the photo. Ayen quickly stepped in, telling him to back off, that he wouldn't get anywhere speaking to a child like that. Her words snapped him out of it. She was right. His emotions had taken over, and this child was innocent. He took a slow breath, forcing himself to calm down. He softened his tone and asked her again who the people were, managing a faint, reassuring smile. Ayen stared at him in quiet surprise, muttering that she never knew he could smile like that. The girl calmed down, pointing to the photo as she spoke. Mommy, Granny, and Grandpa. Vikir froze again, his thoughts racing. Could it be possible that Hugo was her grandfather? He remembered the story Barrymore had once told him. Hugo's wife had died of illness, and not long after, his daughter Penelope was kidnapped by barbarians. From that moment, Hugo was never the same. He'd moved the family from the capital to the border of Le Rouge et Le Noir, desperate to find her. No matter how many hounds he sent into the wild, he never found her. His grief turned to obsession and vengeance. Vikir hadn't believed that story at the time, but now the proof stood right before him. He wondered what Hugo's reaction would be if he ever discovered he had a granddaughter with barbarian blood. He pushed the thought aside, resting his hand gently on the girl's head and telling her she should come with him. The child looked up uncertain. She said, "Hair, eyes, same, Mommy." Vikir told her that was common among the Baskervilles and added that he was probably her uncle. She repeated the word uncle softly, then turned toward her mother's grave. She remembered what her mother once told her. If you ever meet someone with red eyes, you must go with them. The girl turned back to him and gripped his sleeve. "Uncle, I go with." A while later, Vikir left his tent and headed to a meeting with the tribe. Behind him came Pomeranian, chasing after him and asking where he was going. He told her he had to attend a meeting, and she said she wanted to go too. Vikir wondered if she was scared to be alone. Since arriving at the village, she had opened up to him, but looking after a child was proving harder than he thought. He lifted her onto his back, thinking he didn't have much of a choice. He'd have to take her with him. As he walked, he thought he couldn't raise her here. She should be raised in the Empire, but far away from Hugo. Perhaps he could take her to Mr. Chihuahua, he thought. The meeting began inside the chief's hut, the air heavy with tension. The topic was the same one weighing on everyone's mind, the disease spreading deeper into the forest with each passing day. The chief spoke first, saying it was becoming serious, especially with the rainy season approaching. Before she could continue, the tribe's shaman interrupted, insisting the disease was not an illness at all, but a curse. He declared that a grand ritual must be held to save the tribe. Ayen shot back that it wasn't a curse. They needed to abandon the village and relocate before it was too late. Her words set off a storm of voices. The elders argued that they couldn't leave the land where their ancestors' bones rested, the home their tribe had guarded for over 2 centuries. A younger group shouted back that if the plague reached them, all the children would die. Who would be left to carry on the tribe then? The hut filled with arguments and shouting, but Vikir sat in silence, remembering the past. He had seen this before. When the Red Death struck the forest in his previous life, it had nearly spread into the Empire. Camille and the Morgue mages built a wall of fire to stop it, while Dolores, the saint, brought it to an end. Even so, most of the forest tribes perished, and when the natives were gone, monsters flooded in from the depths, turning the borderlands into constant battlegrounds. Baskerville rose to meet the threat, earning the Emperor's favour, and with it, Hugo's growing political power. Vikir raised his hand toward the chief, who was struggling to calm the chaos. He told her he knew how to stop the plague. He wouldn't let Hugo gain even more power this time. Later that day, the tribe gathered around a captured goblin hanging upside down from a tree, bound by its feet with rope. Below it sat a large pot of water. At the chief's signal, the warriors lowered the goblin into the pot, then hauled it back out moments later. Red blotches spread across its skin within seconds. They tossed it into the fire, and Ayen turned to Vikir, saying he'd been right. It was the river water causing the plague. Vikir nodded, telling her that if the water was boiled first, it would be safe. Ayen smiled with interest. Her curiosity piqued. She ordered the pot to be boiled and told the tribe to dunk another goblin. When they pulled it out, the creature was, of course, already dead, and she looked at Vikir in genuine surprise. Vikir told her calmly that the water needed to cool before testing. They tried again later, and this time, as Vikir had said, no red blotches appeared. The chief praised him, thanking him once again for helping the tribe. Vikir warned her not to lower her guard. They needed to be careful not to let contaminated water touch their eyes or mouths, and to watch for foggy mornings. Breathing in the mist could also spread the sickness. Ayin crossed her arms and shot the shaman a smug look, saying loudly that someone had been certain it was a curse. The shaman groaned in frustration before muttering that the rainy season would soon begin. What were they supposed to do then? The tribe began murmuring among themselves, some suggesting that perhaps they should relocate since water would be everywhere once the rains came. The shaman raised his voice angrily, demanding to know if they were really planning to defy the elders' wishes. Vikir stepped forward and told them there was a way to stay until the rainy season passed, a way to relocate without leaving their land. The rainy season arrived at Le Rouge et Le Noir. The river overflowed, turning the land around it into endless marsh. It was the heaviest downpour in the tribe's recorded history. Everything in the woodlands was swallowed by water. Everything except the Valak village. High above the flood, the Valaks worked tirelessly through the storm, connecting wooden platforms among the massive trees that formed their new home. They watched the rising water below and thanked Vikir for keeping their village safe. Vikir stood on one of the higher walkways, watching the rain pour over the vast wetlands. It was fortunate, he thought, that Valak territory had such enormous trees. From behind, Pomeranian called out, asking him to come inside the tent. But as he turned, something in the water caught his attention. A vast shadow moving just beneath the surface. He shouted a warning to the tribesmen standing on a lower platform. A moment later, a massive creature burst out of the water, its jaws open wide to devour them whole. Before it could strike, an arrow flew through the air and struck the beast squarely, sending it crashing back into the river with a thunderous splash. Ayen stood on a nearby branch, telling the beast to get lost. The creature lingered above the surface, glaring at them with predatory eyes. When Vikir asked what it was, Ayen told him it ruled the river in this region. They called it Ka. The beast suddenly whipped its tail, shattering one of the platforms. Vikir lunged forward in anger, furious at seeing the structure he'd worked so hard to build destroyed. He drew Beelzebub and struck with the sixth form, his blade cutting deep into the creature's scales. Ka bellowed in pain and dove back beneath the waves, vanishing into the depths. The two men who had nearly been eaten clung to the trunk of a nearby tree, shaken but alive. The tribe erupted in cheers, shouting Vikir's name, praising him for saving them once again. The shaman scowled, muttering under his breath, while Ayen blushed faintly, unable to hide her admiration as she whispered that he really was perfect. Later that evening, Vikir prepared supper while Pomeranian and Ayen ate with visible delight. Pomeranian smiled, saying the food was delicious, and Ayen added that her uncle was quite the cook. Vikir glanced at her and replied dryly that he didn't remember inviting her. Ayen grinned, saying she couldn't possibly pass by when it smelled so good, teasing that he made a fine house slave. Vikir frowned and argued back that he was a full member of the tribe, not her servant. Their playful bickering carried on as Pomeranian watched them quietly, amused. Then, in the middle of their squabble, she spoke up, saying they looked just like a mommy and daddy. Ayen's face turned bright red before she laughed and pulled Pomeranian into a hug, calling her the sweetest girl. Vikir looked on in silence, wondering when those two had grown so close. The sound of rain filled the hut as someone stepped inside. Ayen turned, startled, and asked what he was doing there. Ahun stood in the doorway, soaked and out of breath. He looked at Vikir with desperation in his eyes. He said that Vikir had saved the village countless times before. So please, he begged, save his sister. Vikir followed Ahun through the rain to his hut, where his sister lay pale and trembling on a straw mat. Her breathing was shallow, her skin marked by faint red spots. He turned to Ahun and asked how long she had been sick. Ahun said it started the day before, after they'd gone together to the swamp. Ayyan looked on, worried, and asked if there was anything Vikir could do. Ahwel had always been kind, always helping around the village. The thought of something happening to her made Ayyan's chest tighten. Before Vikir could respond, the shaman pushed his way into the hut. He glared at Ahun and said, this was what happened when he ignored his grandfather's warnings, when he listened to that imperial spy instead of his own blood. Ahun tried to defend Vikir, but the shaman struck him across the face and shouted at him to be silent, calling him useless just like his parents. He turned, lifted his umbrella, and walked toward the door, declaring that they would appease the gods with a ritual. The chief would have no choice but to listen now. As he left, Ahun began to sob quietly. Vikir broke the silence, saying there was still a way to treat her. He told Ahun to disinfect every utensil in the hut with boiling water, then burn mugwort to drive away insects and bats. It would buy Ahwel enough time for him to get the cure. He asked if Ahun could do that. He wiped his eyes and nodded firmly. When Ahun stepped outside to prepare, Ayyan turned to Vikir, asking if he could truly save her. Vikir said he could, but he would need Ayyan's help. She straightened, saying she'd do anything, just tell her what to do. Vikir looked at her and said she must agree to let him leave the woodlands. He needed to go to the Empire to get the cure. Outside, Ahun returned with the supplies but stopped at the entrance when he heard Ayyan's raised voice. She shouted that Vikir couldn't be serious. Even as a recognized member of the tribe, he was still an outsider. Non-natives were forbidden from leaving the woodlands. Her mother would never allow it. She was right, he said. The chief would sooner let Ahwel die than allow him to leave. But if Ayyan said nothing, he could slip away without anyone noticing. He looked at her steadily. Would she let him go? Ayyan hesitated, torn between fear, duty, and the weight of his words, while Vikir waited for her answer. Vikir moved swiftly through the woodlands under the cover of night. Ayyan had agreed to let him go, and now he made his way toward the border. But after a while he came to a sudden stop. His instincts told him he wasn't alone. Without turning, he spoke quietly, asking why they were following him. Ayyan stepped out from behind a tree, her expression firm despite the worry in her eyes. She told him she wanted to go with him. Vikir shook his head, saying she'd only get in his way. She asked if he would at least tell her where he was going. He told her no. Her gaze shifted to Pomeranian, who was wrapped snugly on his back. She asked why he was taking the girl with him. Vikir didn't answer. Ayyan took a slow breath and said that when she'd seen the blade emerge from his arm, or when he'd known about the Red Death before anyone else, she hadn't asked for an explanation. She never asked anything, because she knew that if she did, he might disappear once he told her. She hesitated, then asked him for one thing. Would he come back? After a pause, Vikir told her he would. He will come back. Without another word, he turned and ran toward the border, disappearing into the forest. Ayyan watched until he was gone, whispering softly to herself. That was a promise. Back at Underdog, Chihuahua sat alone in his office, surrounded by piles of paperwork. He sighed. It was already deep into the night, yet he was still buried in reports. He finally stood and stretched, then wandered to the window. He felt a touch of nostalgia as his thoughts drifted back to the days when he worked under Vikir. Those had been the good old days, demanding, yes, but rewarding. Even now he still couldn't believe Vikir was gone. He gazed up at the night sky and said he missed the deputy magistrate. Chihuahua froze, then stumbled back as Vikir suddenly appeared, hanging upside down from the window, face to face with him. Vikir lowered himself, landing in a crouch on the window ledge. He looked up at Chihuahua with a faint smile and calmly asked how he'd been.